Welcome back, Paradox Explorers, to another episode of Into the Paradox. Today we're diving headfirst into a topic that's been bubbling around the darker corners of the internet, and frankly, it's pretty disturbing. We're talking about the idea that human byproducts are somehow, intentionally, being added to our commercial food supply. It's a claim that conjures up images straight out of a horror film, and it's one that understandably causes a lot of anxiety and distrust. With me today, as always, we have Alex, our resident deep thinker and conspiracy theorist, and David, who also loves to look beyond the headlines. And joining us for this particular dive, we have Tom, an expert in occult and crime research, who can give us some crucial context. Alex, let's start with you. This isn't a new rumor, is it? What's the general gist you've heard circulating?
Thanks, Peter. Yeah, it's definitely not new. It feels like this rumor, or variations of it, has been around for decades, even centuries in some form. The core idea, as I understand it, is that big corporations, driven by some sort of agenda, or perhaps just a desperate need for cheap ingredients, are secretly incorporating human remains or byproducts into processed foods. You hear whispers about fillers, untraceable ingredients, even about how certain medical waste somehow gets diverted. It's usually painted as this massive global conspiracy that's deeply hidden from the public. People point to the sheer volume of processed foods, the rapid expansion of the food industry, and they wonder, where does it all come from? And then, the darker theories emerge.
Right, Alex. And it's not just about fillers for some. I've seen things online, listened to podcasts where they imply it's almost a population control measure, or even worse, some kind of ritualistic element tied into the food supply. People get really fixated on the idea that if you can't pronounce an ingredient, or if it's just listed as natural flavors, then it must be something nefarious, and that something quickly devolves into the most disturbing possibilities. It preys on a fundamental distrust of large systems and a fear of the unknown, especially when it comes to what we put into our bodies. It's a really primal fear, isn't it?
It absolutely is a primal fear, David, and I think that's why this particular rumor takes root so deeply for some. It taps into our deepest anxieties. But before we let those fears run wild, let's bring in some critical thinking and hard facts. Tom, you've researched a lot of the dark underbelly of human history and societal norms. From a purely practical and legal standpoint, how feasible is something like this in, say, a developed country like the US or in Europe?
Peter, from a legal and regulatory standpoint, it's not just unfeasible, it's utterly impossible in a legitimate or legal sense. Every developed country, and honestly most developing ones too, has incredibly strict and comprehensive food safety regulations. We're talking about agencies like the FDA in the US, EFSA in Europe, and their equivalents worldwide. Their entire purpose is to prevent food adulteration, ensure ingredients are safe, and trace supply chains. The inclusion of human material in food wouldn't just be considered adulteration, it would be an extreme form of it, leading to immediate, severe criminal penalties. We're talking federal charges, massive fines, immediate product recalls, and company collapse. No corporation, no matter how shadowy or powerful, could operate for a single day with that kind of risk hanging over its head. The systems are designed to catch and punish this kind of breach.
Isn't that what they want us to believe? That the regulations are so tight that nothing could possibly slip through? What about the loopholes or the dark markets where these things could supposedly be sourced and introduced? Because, if there's a demand for something, people will find a way, right?
Exactly. And let's be real, we've seen corporations cut corners before, even with things like horse meat being passed off as beef. That wasn't human, but it shows that the system isn't always foolproof. So what makes this so different? Why couldn't human material be some extreme version of that, just more carefully hidden?
Those are fair points about past corporate misdeeds, and you're right, David, the system isn't always perfect. But there's a fundamental difference here in scale, risk, and, frankly, the universal human revulsion factor. Tom, can you elaborate on the ethical and moral dimensions? Because this isn't just a legal issue, is it? This taps into something far deeper in the human psyche.
You've hit the nail on the head, Peter. This isn't just about laws, it's about a universal ethical and moral taboo. The concept of consuming human flesh or human byproducts, cannibalism, is abhorrent across almost all cultures and societies throughout history. It's one of the most fundamental taboos we have. It's considered profoundly unethical, deeply disturbing, and often associated with extreme depravity or dire survival situations, not commercial food production. Think about the public outrage, the absolute visceral disgust this would elicit. No company, however large or small, could survive even the accusation, let alone proof, of engaging in such a practice. Their brand would be instantly destroyed, their executives facing criminal charges and a lifetime of infamy. It's a non-starter from a public relations and societal acceptance perspective. It goes against everything we understand about human dignity and respect for the deceased.
Okay, I get the taboo aspect, truly, but some argue that these companies are so powerful, so shielded, that they operate outside of public scrutiny, or that they could suppress any information that came out. We've seen whistleblowers silenced before, right?
And some theories connect it to more esoteric, even occult beliefs, where certain powerful groups might actually desire this kind of consumption for ritualistic reasons. Tom, you research occult topics. Have you ever come across anything in historical or occult practices that suggests a widespread, organized, and commercialized form of this?
That's an interesting question, David, and I appreciate you bringing it to my area of expertise. While cannibalism has occurred historically, often in extreme famine, warfare, or sometimes as a very specific, limited ritual in certain isolated tribal contexts, and I mean very isolated and ritualistic, not for sustenance or widespread consumption, there is absolutely no historical precedent nor any evidence in occult studies or documented criminal activities of a sophisticated, large-scale commercial supply chain for human remains or byproducts entering the general food supply for mass consumption. The idea of it being a ritualistic practice on a corporate industrial scale is completely unfounded and, frankly, strains credulity beyond breaking point. Occult practices, even the darkest ones, typically involve symbolic acts or very small-scale, secretive operations, not something that would require factories and distribution networks. The logistics alone would be a nightmare to keep secret, let alone execute.
Logistics are a huge point, but let's also talk about something even more fundamental. Health risks. Even if we put aside the legal and moral issues for a moment, the idea of processing human tissue for food carries immense, almost catastrophic public health risks. Tom, what are the medical realities here?
Oh, the health risks are astronomical. We're talking about a public health catastrophe waiting to happen. Human tissues can transmit a vast array of diseases. Prion diseases like Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, which are incredibly rare but invariably fatal and not easily destroyed by typical food processing methods. Various viruses like HIV, hepatitis, herpes, and countless others, bacteria, parasites. The list goes on. Even with advanced processing, the potential for cross-contamination and the spread of pathogens would be immense. It would make something like mad cow disease look like a minor inconvenience. The regulatory bodies aren't just concerned with is it human, they're concerned with is it safe, and human tissue, if not handled with extreme medical precautions, is inherently unsafe for general consumption.
But couldn't they cleanse it or process it to the point where it's no longer harmful? I mean, they do that with other questionable ingredients, right? High heat, chemical processes. Science finds a way.
Yeah, like how they process things that are normally considered waste from animal farming. If they can make those safe, why not this, if it were happening?
That's a good question, David, and it brings us back to the real story of food byproducts, which we'll get to. But first, let's address this idea of cleansing. Tom, even with extreme measures, is it truly feasible to make human tissue safe for mass consumption, given the unique pathogens it can carry?
Not to the degree required for human food consumption, no. The prion diseases I mentioned are notoriously resistant to conventional sterilization methods, including high heat. Many viruses and bacteria can be deactivated, sure, but you'd be dealing with a biohazard every step of the way, from collection to initial processing. The risk of even one contaminated batch slipping through and causing an epidemic or a novel disease outbreak would be so high that no legitimate public health authority would ever sign off on such a process. It's not just about a single ingredient, it's about the entire chain of custody and the inherent risks associated with processing potentially infectious biological material. It's simply not comparable to processing animal byproducts, which, while regulated, come from a much more controlled and understood biological environment with specific monitored disease profiles.
And that leads us perfectly to the next critical point, the supply chain, or rather, the complete lack thereof. Where would these human byproducts or bodies even come from? Tom, you've looked into crime and forensics. How are human remains and medical waste actually handled?
This is where the theory completely falls apart on a practical level. There is no infrastructure, no legal means, and absolutely no ethical pathway to harvest human byproducts or bodies for consumption. Human remains, whether from a morgue, a medical facility, or after death, are treated with immense dignity and respect. They are either returned to families for burial or cremation, or in specific, highly regulated medical and research contexts, donated for scientific study with explicit consent. Even then, those remains are meticulously tracked and disposed of according to strict protocols. Medical waste, on the other hand, which might include human tissues from surgeries or biopsies, is considered biohazardous. It's handled through specific, highly regulated and secure disposal methods. This usually involves specialized incinerators that reach extremely high temperatures, or chemical treatment designed precisely to prevent it from entering any general waste stream, let alone a food chain. It's a completely separate, highly controlled and expensive process that ensures public safety and respects human remains. The idea that it could be covertly diverted on an industrial scale is just nonsensical.
But what about black markets? You hear about illegal organ harvesting. Couldn't that extend to other tissues or even bodies? And then if someone is desperate or if there's a huge profit motive, couldn't something like that be funneled into a hidden supply chain?
Yeah, exactly. The same way illicit drugs move through hidden networks. Why couldn't a human byproduct trade exist for certain sectors, even if it's not the official one?
That's a dark thought, and while illicit trades unfortunately do exist for things like organs, the scale and nature are completely different from what would be required for a commercial food supply. Organ trafficking is a horrific underground crime, but it's not industrial-scale food processing. It relies on extreme secrecy and desperation, not open distribution. And it's not for consumption. Let's pivot now to what is true, because there's a kernel of truth in the idea that food processing uses byproducts, just not human ones. Can we talk about what byproducts actually means in the legitimate food industry? Because I think that's where some of the confusion originates. David, Alex, when you hear byproduct, what usually comes to mind?
Honestly, Peter, byproduct usually sounds industrial, like something left over, not necessarily the best part, maybe even something that would otherwise be thrown away. And that's where the jump to something sinister happens for a lot of people.
Yeah, exactly. It sounds like a cheap filler. You know, when you hear about pink slime in ground beef, even if it's totally safe, it just sounds unappetizing. And if they're willing to do that, what else are they willing to do?
Those are very common and understandable associations, but in the food industry, byproduct often refers to something perfectly safe and nutritious that simply isn't the primary product. For example, Tom, what are some of the common, legitimate byproducts used in food?
Absolutely. Let's clear this up. When we talk about byproducts in legitimate food processing, we're talking about things like soy protein, which comes from soybeans after the oil is extracted, or whey protein, which is a byproduct of cheese production from milk, and it's incredibly valuable for nutrition. Cellulose comes from plant fibers and is used as a thickener or filler. Various starches from corn, potatoes, or wheat are also byproducts, giving texture and body to many foods. Gelatin is another classic example, derived from animal bones and hides, used in everything from desserts to medication capsules. These are all derived from sources that are legally and ethically approved for human consumption, have a long history of safe use in the food industry, and are often highly beneficial from a nutritional or functional standpoint. The key here is that they are all from approved agricultural products, not human. It's about maximizing resources from established, safe sources.
So when people see gelatin on an ingredient list or hydrolyzed protein, they might jump to conclusions, but it's actually just from, say, cows or pigs or plants, not other sources?
Precisely. The terminology can sound a bit sterile or scientific, which sometimes fuels mistrust, but it's all standard, regulated, and originates from well understood non human biological sources. The regulations are very clear about requiring accurate labeling of ingredients and their sources. If it says gelatin, it's animal derived, and the specific animal source is often further specified if it's relevant for dietary restrictions like bovine or porcine. If it's plant based, it's clearly labelled as such, e.g., vegetable glycerin or plant based protein.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. The jargon can be confusing. But then, if demand for food is growing globally and there are all these pressures, couldn't a really desperate, unethical company eventually try to bypass all those regulations and taboos if they thought they could get away with it and make a huge profit?
That's a critical question, David, and it's often the root of the why for these kinds of theories. People see a growing global population and wonder how we're going to feed everyone, and then these dark ideas emerge. But the truth is, the world is addressing growing food demand just through completely legitimate, ethical, and sustainable means. Tom, can you touch on those solutions?
Absolutely. The global food demand is a very real challenge, but the solutions being pursued are light years away from anything illicit or unethical. We're seeing massive investment and innovation in improving agricultural efficiency, think better crop yields, more resilient plants, precision farming techniques that use fewer resources. Sustainable farming practices are also key, like regenerative agriculture, reducing reliance on harmful pesticides, and optimizing water usage. Then there's the exciting world of alternative protein sources. Plant-based proteins are booming, offering delicious and nutritious alternatives to meat. In some cultures, insects are already a recognized and sustainable protein source. And looking to the future, we have lab-grown animal meat, which is still in its early stages, but promises a way to produce meat without the environmental footprint of traditional animal husbandry. Finally, a huge focus is on reducing food waste, from the farm to the consumer's plate. Globally, a staggering amount of food is wasted, and tackling that alone could feed millions.
So, the growing demand argument for why this conspiracy might exist actually has much more hopeful and innovative solutions already in play. It's not leading to a sinister outcome.
Exactly, Alex. The legitimate efforts to feed the world are incredibly dynamic and positive. They're about innovation, sustainability, and ethics, not about violating fundamental human rights or public safety. It's a testament to human ingenuity, not depravity. In summary, the idea of human byproducts or bodies being used in the commercial food supply is a deeply disturbing misconception. It's unequivocally false. The legal frameworks are too strict, the ethical and moral taboos are too universal, the health risks are too immense, and there's simply no supply chain for it. It's a fear-driven narrative that collapses under scrutiny. David, any final thoughts?
I think what's important is to remember that while it's good to question things, there's a line between healthy skepticism and believing everything that confirms your deepest fears. And sometimes the simplest explanation really is the most accurate. The systems, for all their flaws, are designed to prevent something this egregious. It gives me a bit more peace of mind, honestly, to hear the practical realities.
Yeah, I agree with David. It's easy to get caught up in the narratives that suggest everything is hidden and nefarious. But when you break it down with facts, with the legal, ethical, and logistical realities, it just doesn't hold up. It's a reminder that even the most sensational claims need a reality check, and understanding the real challenges and solutions in food production is far more empowering than dwelling on unfounded fears.
I think it highlights the importance of media literacy and critical thinking more broadly. When a claim seems to trigger such a profound emotional response, that's often a red flag to dig deeper, to check sources, and to understand the underlying mechanisms that would have to be in place for such a claim to be true. In this case, those mechanisms simply do not exist in the legitimate world. Fantastic points, all of you. It's crucial to apply that critical lens to everything we hear, especially in the digital age. So for all of you listening, rest assured the food on your plate is not made from human byproducts. The world is facing food challenges, but it's responding with innovation and integrity, not with horror movie scenarios. Thank you, Alex, David, and Tom, for shedding light on this incredibly important, if a bit unsettling, topic. And thank you, Paradox Explorers, for joining us. We'll be back next time with another deep dive. Until then, stay curious, stay critical, and stay well.